The Nephilim are one of the strangest mysteries in the Bible. They appear in only a few lines in the book of Genesis. Just before the story of Noah and the flood, the Bible says they were mighty men of old, men of renown. But it does not clearly tell us what they looked like, how large they were, or why their presence mattered so much. And that is where the mystery begins. Who were the Nephilim? Were they ancient giants, powerful warriors, legendary kings, or something even stranger? How were they born from the mysterious union between the sons of God and the daughters of men? And why does this strange story appear right before the world is destroyed by the flood? To understand the Nephilim, we have to enter one of the darkest and most cryptic moments in early Genesis. This is the world before the flood, before the ark, before the rain, before Noah became the man remembered for surviving the waters. It is a world where humanity is multiplying. Cities are rising. Violence is spreading. And something about creation itself seems to be slipping out of order. Genesis does not introduce the Nephilim like ordinary characters. It gives us only fragments, a forbidden gaze, a mysterious taking, children born into an ancient world, and figures remembered as mighty and renowned. Then, almost immediately, the story turns toward divine grief, corruption, violence, and judgment. That placement is what makes them so haunting. The Nephilim are not only a question about ancient giants, they are a question about power, fame, violence, and what happens when a world begins to admire greatness more than goodness. So tonight, we will follow the mystery step by step. We will begin with the strange passage before the flood. Then we will look at the world that was already darkening before they appeared. We will explore the mysterious sons of God, the daughters of men, and the forbidden birth connected to the Nephilim. We will ask why Genesis calls them mighty men of old, and why their story stands so close to the moment when God looks at the earth and sees it filled with violence. And by the end, the question will not only be, who were the Nephilim? It will be something deeper. What kind of world gives birth to them? The passage begins in an ordinary way. Human beings began to multiply on the face of the earth. Daughters were born to them. The world was filling with life, generation after generation, family after family, voice after voice beneath the ancient sky. At first, nothing about this sounds frightening. It sounds like the continuation of creation, life spreading, humanity growing, the earth becoming inhabited. But then Genesis changes the atmosphere with almost no warning. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whoever they chose. The sentence is short, but it feels heavy. There is a seeing, there is desire, there is taking, and then, in the same strange space of the story, the Nephilim appear. Genesis says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men and children were born to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. And then the text moves on. That is part of the mystery. A modern writer might have stopped there and explained everything. Who the sons of God were, what kind of beings the Nephilim were, how they looked, what powers they had, how ordinary people reacted when they saw them. But Genesis does not do that. It gives us a few carved lines, like an inscription on an ancient stone, and then continues toward the flood. The silence around the passage becomes almost as powerful as the words themselves. For a listener new to the Bible, Genesis is the opening book of Scripture. It tells the story of creation, the Garden of Eden, the first humans, the first rebellion, the first exile, and the earliest generations of humanity. It is a book of beginnings, but not gentle beginnings only. It is also a book about how quickly something beautiful can become broken. By the time the Nephilim are mentioned, the world has already moved far from Eden. Human beings are no longer standing in a garden of innocence. They are living in a world where death has entered, where violence has begun, where families carry wounds, and where the ground itself has already received blood. So, when Genesis introduces the Nephilim, it does not feel like a random legend placed inside the text. It feels like a sign that the world has reached a dangerous threshold. The Nephilim are called mighty men of old, men of renown. That phrase matters. It tells us they were remembered. Their names carried weight. They belong to an ancient age of power and fame, an age that seemed impressive on the surface, but in the biblical story was moving toward ruin. Because in Genesis, being famous is not the same as being good. Being mighty is not the same as being righteous. And being remembered by history does not mean being approved by heaven. This is where the story begins to open beyond ancient mystery. The Nephilim are not only strange because of what they may have been, they are strange because of what they represent. They stand in the story as figures of greatness, but their greatness does not heal the world around them. It darkens with it. The placement of the Nephilim is what makes them so haunting. They appear just before Genesis says that human wickedness had become great on the earth, and that every intention of the human heart was continually turned toward evil. The movement is quiet, but devastating. Humanity multiplies. The sons of God see. They take. The Nephilim are there. And then God looks upon the world and grieves. The story does not invite us to stare at the Nephilim as if they were only strange bodies from an ancient age. It invites us to ask what their presence meant. Why are they here, in this place in the story? Why just before the flood? Why does Genesis mention them at the very edge of the old world's destruction? That is the first doorway. And once it opens, we cannot understand the Nephilim by looking only at them. We have to look at the ground beneath them. We have to ask what kind of world could give birth to such figures. And Genesis has already been answering that question, long before the rain begins. The world before the flood was not empty or primitive in the simple way we sometimes imagine. Genesis does not describe it as a silent wilderness with nothing happening. It shows human life moving forward. Families grow, settlements form, work begins, animals are kept, music is played, tools are forged, names are passed down from father to son. Humanity is building a world, but something is wrong inside the building. The wound begins early with Cain and Abel. They are brothers, children of the first human family. Abel keeps flocks. Cain works the ground. Both bring offerings. But inside Cain, resentment begins to gather. It does not appear at first as a sword. It appears as a shadow in the heart. Then, in a field, Cain rises against Abel and kills him. The first recorded human death in the Bible is not an accident. It is not illness. It is not old age after a long and peaceful life. It is murder. That detail hangs over everything that follows. The story of humanity outside Eden begins with a brother's blood crying out from the ground. The soil that was meant to give life now receives the body of the first victim. The human family, still so close to the beginning, is already torn open by violence. Cain is sent away. Genesis says he goes out from the presence of the Lord and settles east of Eden. There, he builds a city and names it after his son. This is one of those details that should be read slowly. The Bible does not say every city is evil. It does not reduce civilization to sin. But it does show us something tragic. Human culture can advance even when the human heart is not healed. Walls can rise around fear. Songs can be played in violent houses. Tools can be forged in a world where hands have already learned to kill. Later in Cain's line, Genesis introduces Lamech. He is remembered as a man with 2 wives, and around his family, we hear the sounds of early civilization growing louder. There are people who dwell in tents and keep livestock. There are people who play the lyre and pipe. There are people who forge tools of bronze and iron. It is almost beautiful. You can imagine the glow of the forge at night, the first notes of music drifting over the dark ground, the movement of animals under the care of herdsmen, human skill awakening in a young world. But then Lamech speaks, and his words turn the beauty cold. He boasts of killing a man for wounding him, a young man for striking him. Violence is no longer hidden in shame. It has become something a man can recite, something he can turn into a song of pride before his own household. This is the dark brilliance of the pre-flood world. It is not a world without culture. It is a world where culture and corruption grow together. Music and murder are not far apart. Metalwork and vengeance stand under the same roof. Human beings are becoming creative, but not necessarily whole. That distinction matters, especially for a modern listener. A society can become more advanced without becoming more humane. It can learn to build, trade, sing, organize, and remember names, while still losing the inner shape that makes life sacred. It can become impressive on the outside and hollow at the center. Genesis also gives another line, the line of Seth, another son born to Adam and Eve after Abel's death. Through this line, the story preserves a quieter movement. People begin to call on the name of the Lord. Later, this line leads toward Noah. For our story, we do not need to follow every name. What matters is the contrast. One movement is loud, cities, pride, vengeance, power, and blood. The other is quieter, worship, memory, faithfulness, and the fragile hope that humanity has not completely forgotten God. By the time we reach Genesis 6, the world has already been darkening for a long time. The Nephilim do not appear in a peaceful age, suddenly interrupted by strangeness. They appear in a world where violence has already entered the family, the city, the song, and the imagination. That makes their appearance more frightening, not less, because they are not the first sign that something is wrong. They are the escalation. They are the moment when a wounded human world seems to become entangled with a deeper disorder. Genesis has already shown us murder. It has already shown us pride. It has already shown us culture growing beside violence. Then it shows us a crossing. The sons of God see the daughters of men. They take, and something is born into the old world. The phrase sons of God is where the mystery becomes difficult. Genesis does not stop to define it. It does not explain the phrase in a footnote. It simply uses it, as if placing an ancient object in the middle of a dim room and letting later generations walk around it in wonder. Who were they? For centuries, readers have answered in different ways. One ancient interpretation sees the sons of God as heavenly beings, or angelic figures, who crossed into the human world in a forbidden way. In this reading, Genesis 6 is not only about human sin, it is about a breach between realms. A moment when beings who belonged to the heavenly order stepped outside their proper place. This is the interpretation that gives the story its most cosmic atmosphere. The sky is no longer only sky. The human world is no longer sealed within itself. Something from beyond ordinary human life looks downward, sees beauty, desires it, and enters the human story. Later, Jewish traditions expanded this idea in dramatic ways. Some writings outside the Hebrew Bible spoke of watchers, forbidden knowledge, and giant offspring. These traditions are not the same thing as Genesis itself, and they should not be treated as if every detail came directly from the biblical passage. But they reveal something important. Ancient readers felt the darkness of Genesis 6. They sensed that these few lines were not ordinary. They heard a disturbance in them, a spiritual tremor beneath the surface of the text. They tried to imagine what Genesis only briefly named. Another interpretation sees the sons of God not as heavenly beings, but as powerful rulers, kings, or tyrants in the ancient world. Kings often claimed divine favor, divine ancestry, or divine authority. Some presented themselves as more than ordinary men, as if their power placed them closer to heaven than everyone else. In this reading, the sons of God are human rulers who become godlike in their own imagination. They see women, they take whoever they choose. Their desire becomes law. Their power becomes entitlement. The Nephilim, then, belong to a world of warrior elites, ancient champions, and violent dynasties remembered for their might. This reading keeps the story on earth, but the darkness remains. Because a human king who believes himself above ordinary limits can become almost as dangerous as a fallen heavenly being. He still crosses a boundary. He still turns power into possession. He still treats human life as something to be taken. A third interpretation sees the sons of God as descendants of Seth, the line associated with worship, intermarrying with the daughters of Cain's line, the line associated with violence and exile. In this view, the story is not about heavenly beings or divine kings, but about spiritual compromise. The line that was meant to preserve faithfulness becomes absorbed into the world it was meant to resist. The boundary is not cosmic, but moral. And still, it breaks. These interpretations differ, and a careful documentary should not pretend the mystery is solved beyond all debate. Genesis is brief. The language is ancient. The passage has carried many readings through Jewish and Christian history, but all three readings share one deep emotional center. Something crosses a line. That is the heart of the story. The passage begins with seeing. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. Then seeing becomes taking. Beauty is no longer received with reverence. It becomes something seized. That movement is small in wording, but enormous in meaning. They saw, they took, and children were born. Genesis places the Nephilim in that strange moment. Many readers have understood them as the offspring of this union, though the exact relationship in the wording has been discussed for centuries. So, the wisest way to speak is with care. The Bible connects their presence to this crossing, without explaining every mechanism of their birth, but the emotional meaning is clear. The Nephilim are born in the shadow of disorder. Whether the sons of God are understood as heavenly rebels, violent god kings, or a compromised human line, the birth belongs to a world where boundaries are collapsing. Desire is no longer governed by holiness. Power is no longer restrained by goodness. The sacred order of life is being disturbed. And this is why the story feels forbidden. Not because Genesis gives us every biological detail. It does not. But because everything about the scene carries the feeling of violation, a gaze that becomes possession, a union that belongs to a darkening world, a generation remembered for might and renown, born just before the earth is described as corrupt and filled with violence. This is also where the story becomes more than an ancient puzzle. It begins to speak about the danger of appetite without restraint, the danger of power without humility, the danger of seeing another life not as sacred, but as something to be claimed. Imagine that world for a moment. Night over the ancient earth, fires burning outside early dwellings, smoke rising into a sky crowded with stars, families sleeping behind walls of stone and wood. Somewhere, a child is born, and the air around that birth feels heavier than it should. The child will grow, the name will be remembered. People will speak of strength, of fame, of old powers walking the earth. But Genesis will not celebrate that strength. It will place it beside grief. Because in the Bible's moral imagination, not every mighty birth is a blessing. Some births are warnings. The Nephilim were mighty men of old, men of renown. Those are the words Genesis gives us. And because the words are so few, the imagination rushes in. Were they giants? Were they warriors? Were they ancient kings? Were they something more frightening than any ordinary human enemy? The Bible does not hand us a full description. It gives us a reputation and places that reputation in one of the darkest moments of early Genesis. Mighty men, men of renown, figures remembered from the old world. The word renown is important because it means their names carried power. They were spoken of. They were feared or admired. Their memory was strong enough to survive in the ancient imagination. But memory can be dangerous. Human beings often remember strength before they remember righteousness. We tell stories of conquerors, warriors, giants, kings, and men whose names shook their age. Fame can make violence look grand from a distance. Power can turn brutality into legend. Genesis refuses to let that happen without tension. It does not describe the Nephilim as righteous men of old. It does not call them faithful. It does not place them in the line of quiet obedience. It calls them mighty and renowned. And then it turns immediately to the corruption of the earth. That contrast is the key. The Bible is not simply saying, "Look how powerful they were." It is asking us to feel what kind of world admires power when goodness is disappearing. The Nephilim stand inside that contradiction. They are remembered, but their memory is surrounded by darkness. They are mighty, but their might belongs to a world on the edge of judgment. Genesis says that God saw the wickedness of humanity was great upon the earth. Every intention of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil continually. Later, the earth is described as corrupt in God's sight and filled with violence. Filled, that word makes the world feel suffocated. Violence is no longer an occasional wound. It has become atmosphere. It is in the streets, in the houses, in the judgments of rulers, in the pride of strong men, in the fear of the weak. It has spread like smoke until people can breathe it without noticing. This is where the Nephilim become more than a question of size. The deeper terror is not simply that there may have been beings of unusual strength in the ancient world. The deeper terror is that strength itself had become detached from moral weight. The mighty were renowned, but the world was not healed by their greatness. It was ruined beneath it. And that is why this story can still speak to people who do not know every name in Genesis. The Nephilim are ancient, but the danger they represent is not ancient at all. Every age has its own way of admiring the powerful before asking whether they are just. Every age can confuse being remembered with being worthy. A person can be influential and still be empty. A kingdom can be impressive and still be cruel. A civilization can be loud with achievement and still be quietly losing its conscience. Later in the Bible, the name Nephilim appears again, in a very different moment, in the book of Numbers, long after the flood story. Moses sends spies into the land of Canaan. These spies return afraid. They speak of the descendants of Anak and say they saw Nephilim there. Then they describe themselves in a haunting image. They felt like grasshoppers. Whether that report is meant as literal description, fearful exaggeration, inherited memory, or symbolic dread is still debated. But emotionally, the line is unforgettable. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. That is what the name Nephilim does when it returns. It shrinks the human body. It makes courage collapse inward. It turns the land ahead into a place filled with old shadows. It suggests that the fear attached to the Nephilim was not easily erased. Even after the world before the flood had vanished. But the main story remains in Genesis. And in Genesis, the Nephilim belong to the age before judgment. They belong to a world where greatness had become terrifying because it no longer answered to goodness. You can imagine the old earth under a darkening sky, forges glowing at night, music drifting from houses where vengeance is still remembered, children growing up with stories of mighty figures who took what they wanted, the weak learning to lower their eyes, the strong learning that no one could stop them. And above it all, God sees. That is one of the most powerful movements in Genesis. Human beings see beauty and take. God sees corruption and grieves. The contrast is devastating. The sons of God see and desire. God sees and mourns. The Nephilim may be the famous figures of that world, but the deepest emotion in the passage does not belong to them. It belongs to the Creator, looking at a creation that has become almost unrecognizable. Genesis says God was grieved in his heart. That line prevents the flood from becoming a simple story of anger. It gives the coming judgment sorrow. It shows us not a careless destruction, but a broken-hearted response to a world filled with violence. The Nephilim are not the whole reason the world falls. Genesis does not make the story that simple, but they stand near the center of the darkness. As part of the atmosphere of corrupted greatness, broken boundaries, and violence without restraint. And then, in the middle of all this, another name appears. Not a mighty man of renown, not a conqueror, not a figure admired by the violent world. Noah, a quieter name, a different kind of strength. Noah enters the story like a candle in a storm. After the strange union, after the Nephilim, after the description of human wickedness. Genesis says that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. He was righteous in his generation. He walked with God. For many people, Noah is remembered first as the man who built the ark. But in the story itself, before he is a builder, he is a contrast. The Nephilim are mighty and renowned. Noah is righteous. The old world is filled with violence. Noah walks with God. For a general listener, that word righteous does not need to sound distant or religiously complicated. In this story, it means Noah still has an inner compass when the world around him has lost its way. He still lives as if goodness matters. He still listens when everyone else seems deaf to warning. The names remembered by that age may have belonged to strength, fame, and fear. But the future of humanity rests with a man who listens. That is the quiet reversal at the heart of the flood story. God tells Noah that the end of all flesh has come before him, because the earth is filled with violence. Then he gives Noah instructions for the ark, a vessel that will carry life through judgment. The ark is not only a boat, it is a line of mercy drawn through a world collapsing under its own corruption. It is wood, pitch, labor, obedience, and waiting. It is survival shaped by faith. Picture Noah beneath a clear sky, cutting timber, sealing boards, building something that must have looked strange to everyone around him. The smell of wood in the air, the sound of tools striking, dust on his hands, silence between commands. Around him, life continues. People marry, children play, fires are lit, food is prepared, arguments rise and fade, songs are sung. The world does not look like it is ending every minute of the day. That may be the most unsettling part. The old world is not described as sitting still in terror. It is alive. It has routines. It has confidence. It has people who assume tomorrow will resemble today. But Genesis says the earth is filled with violence. Then the waters come. The deep breaks open. The heavens open. The boundaries of the created world seem to loosen. Water rises over the ground, over the settlements, over the places where old names were spoken with fear, whatever strength the mighty possessed. whatever fame they carried, whatever dread surrounded them, none of it can hold back the flood. The world of the Nephilim disappears beneath water. Genesis does not give them a final speech. It does not give the mighty men one last battle against the storm. It does not show ancient heroes standing on mountain peaks and resisting judgment. It lets the waters rise, and then the old world is silent. That silence is part of the meaning. The famous names are gone. The violence is gone. The cities, songs, weapons, and blood-soaked pride of that age are gone. Everything that seemed unshakable is covered. Only the ark remains. Inside it, Noah and his family pass through the waters, not because they are mighty in the way the old world understood might, but because grace has preserved them. When the waters recede, Noah steps onto a changed earth. The air is washed. The ground is visible again. The world is beginning again, but not as it began in Eden. This is a new beginning after judgment, after grief, after silence. And the first great act Noah performs is not the building of a city. It is not a monument to his name. It is not a throne, a wall, or a weapon. It is an altar. That image answers the old world. Cain, after blood and exile, built a city. Noah, after water and survival, builds an altar. One world tried to make a name under the shadow of violence. The new beginning opens with worship. But the mystery of the Nephilim does not close completely. Genesis had said they were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Those words remain difficult. And also afterward. After what? After those days? After that union? After the flood? The phrase has been discussed for centuries, and no honest telling should pretend it is simple. Later, when the spies in Numbers speak of Nephilim in the land, the old dread seems to return. Maybe it is literal. Maybe it is exaggeration from terrified men. Maybe it is a memory attached to enemies who seemed too strong to face. Maybe it is the Bible showing how ancient fear can survive as a name. Whatever the case, the shadow remains. The flood ends the old world. But the word Nephilim is not easily erased from the biblical imagination. It lingers like a dark shape beneath clear water, a reminder that some mysteries are not closed by force. They continue as echoes. So how were the Nephilim born? Genesis answers carefully, mysteriously, and only in part. They appear in connection with the sons of God and the daughters of men, with a crossing that has been interpreted in more than one way. Some see heavenly beings stepping beyond their proper place. Some see violent rulers claiming divine power. Some see the collapse of a faithful human line into corruption. But in every reading, the birth belongs to disorder. The Nephilim are born where desire, power, and broken boundaries meet. And why does their story appear just before the flood? Because Genesis wants us to feel the condition of the world before the waters. The Nephilim are not there to satisfy curiosity. They are there to deepen the atmosphere of a world that had become violent, unstable, and spiritually wounded. They show us that the old world still had greatness, but greatness was not enough to save it. It had renown, but renown was not righteousness. It had mighty men, but might without goodness had become part of the ruin. That may be why Genesis says so little. The passage does not invite us to master the mystery completely. It invites us to stand at the edge of the flood and understand that the water came into a world already broken, a world where beauty had been seized, where boundaries had been crossed, where violence filled the earth, where God grieved, and where one quiet man, not one mighty empire, became the vessel through which life would continue. The story of the Nephilim remains one of the Bible's most cryptic mysteries because it refuses to become simple. It begins with only a few lines. Humanity multiplies. The sons of God see the daughters of men. They take. Children are born. The Nephilim are there. Mighty men of old. Men of renown. Then the passage moves almost immediately toward grief, violence, Noah, and the flood. For thousands of years, readers have stood before those lines and tried to understand what they mean. Some have seen a story of heavenly beings crossing a forbidden boundary. Some have seen ancient kings turning power into divine entitlement. Some have seen the tragedy of a faithful line losing itself inside a corrupt world. But beneath all those interpretations, one truth remains haunting. The Nephilim stand at the edge of a world where greatness had become frightening. They remind us that power can be admired even when it is corrupt. Fame can survive even when goodness disappears. A civilization can build, sing, forge, marry, and remember names while slowly losing the sacred shape that holds life together. And maybe that is why this ancient story still feels strangely close to us. Because every age has its own Nephilim. Not always giants in body, not always warriors from a forgotten world. Sometimes they appear as ambitions that grow too large. Systems that reward power without conscience. Names that become famous without becoming good. And cultures that mistake influence for wisdom. Genesis is not only asking us to wonder what the Nephilim were. It is asking what happens when a world begins to admire strength more than truth, fame more than mercy, and power more than the quiet discipline of the soul. And then comes Noah, not mighty in the way the old world understood might, not renowned like the men of violence, not surrounded by legends of conquest. He is remembered because he walked with God when the world around him had forgotten how. That is the quiet reversal. The mighty vanish beneath the waters. The obedient remain. The famous names of the old world sink into silence. And one man steps out onto the washed earth and builds an altar. Perhaps Genesis gives us so little about the Nephilim because the point was never to turn them into a spectacle. Perhaps the mystery is meant to do something deeper. It is meant to make us feel the danger of a world where boundaries collapse, where desire becomes conquest, where strength no longer bows to anything holy. In the end, the Nephilim are not only a question about ancient beings, they are a question about the kind of world that produces them. A world can be full of life and still be close to judgment. It can be full of names and still be losing its soul. It can be full of mighty men and still have almost no goodness left. And that may be the most haunting answer Genesis gives. The Nephilim were born in a world that had forgotten the difference between greatness and goodness.